Well, good afternoon. Welcome back. Please take a seat and get yourselves settled. Before I introduce even the topic and the guests, I just want to take note that this session during lunch is being webcast as part of a weekly Friday event that the Mobility Initiative does that is called the Mobility Forum. I just want to make sure everybody can hear me okay. Great. And so yes, we are, in addition to the folks here in this room in Boston, we have 200 to 300 people online who are listening to this conversation. So this morning I suggested these kind of 10 trends or tensions. And the first one I opened with was geopolitics and the kind of shifting geopolitical landscape. You want to grab me a handheld? Actually, that's probably going to be better. And so this session is specifically, thank you, Bhuvan. So this session is specifically about looking at China. And China, both as a consumer of mobility, becoming the largest automotive market in the world in 2008, I believe, and both as a consumer, but also as a producer. Let me just clarify what this session is not about. This session is not about some sort of, China bashing exercise or anything like that. I personally spent 20 years of my career traveling back and forth to China twice a year. And for me, it is a very special place, a very innovative, dynamic environment. And so what we're here to understand is the politics of what is happening in the world. We've always lived in a world where politics influences industry and where industry influences politics. But it feels like that relationship has become more intense. And so the goal of this session is really twofold. We want to kind of look back and ask ourselves, how did we get to where we are today in the current situation, the current context? In terms of China growing to be a leader in electric vehicles, in battery technology, and several other critical mobility technologies. And then we want to have a short second conversation about looking forward and thinking where this could go. So let me introduce our panelists. So immediately to my right is Michael Dunn. Michael is the CEO of Dunn Insights. I describe Michael as a free radical. Okay, so this guy graduates from the University of Michigan with a degree in Chinese studies, and this was what, 1990 or so. I'm dating you, I guess. And he says, I'm going to move to Asia, right? And I'm going to start like advising companies who want to understand the Chinese market and other Asian markets, particularly in the automotive space, and really has become a kind of leading figure in this question of how automotive markets have evolved in Asia and in China in particular. Then next to Michael is Christina Lampe Onerud. I probably did not pronounce that correct, but my Swedish is terrible. Christina is the founder and CEO of Cadenza Innovation, which is a energy storage battery technology company. She is very much a scientist, a leader in the space. She's also the founder and former CEO of Boston Power, which was a prominent battery technology company located here in Massachusetts. And then to Christina's right is Benjamin Q. Benjamin is a China tech expert. He's a lawyer, but we'll forgive you. That's okay. He's a partner with Elliott Kwok Levine and Jaroslav. And Benjamin brings to us 2 decades of experience in understanding big deals among multinational companies, crossing that divide between Europe and China and the United States and China. So focusing in technology licensing, venture capital financing, and other areas relevant to the tech world. Okay, so let's just kick it right off. So I'm going to turn immediately over to Michael to share some thoughts about the context where we are. I mentioned this morning in Munich 2 months ago, all the German and European CEOs, the car companies are saying, "Oh my God, the EVs have arrived in the European market. Great vehicles at great prices, lots of concerns." Take us a little bit through where we are.
Tremendous. Thanks very much, John. Good afternoon, everybody. It was earlier this year in April, one afternoon, I got a call, unexpected call from a good friend of mine. His name is Klaus Meyer, a German executive at Mercedes-Benz. And I've known Klaus since the 90s. He used to run Southeast Asia for Mercedes. And then later he was a president of Mercedes-Benz China in the 2010s. So he calls and I say, "Hey, Meyer, what's going on?" And he said, "It is a shock." And I said, "Excuse me?" He said, "A shock, I tell you." So I said, what's a shock? And he said, "The Chinese have taken over." And just then the line cut out. So I was a little bit concerned, but after a minute he called back and he said, "I'm standing at the Shanghai Auto Show and I cannot believe my eyes. Forever, Michael, we've seen that at the Shanghai Auto Show, which goes for football fields, is massive, with oceans of people, that the global joint ventures, your Mercedes, your Volkswagens, your Buicks, your Toyotas, were center stage. That's what the Chinese consumers loved, and they were dominant. And then in the corners and the side sort of corridors, you might find some incidental Chinese brands that no one really cared about or looked at." He said, "Guess what? That era is over. At this year's Shanghai Auto Show, it's all the Chinese brands front and center, and all the consumers are going there." He said, "It's a revolution, and the global automakers are in big trouble." Okay, so that was a call. A few weeks later, I found myself at the headquarters of BYD in Pasadena, California. They've just established brand new headquarters, tripling their size, and had the opportunity to test drive some of their latest cars. One is the BYD Tang, which is a nice looking SUV, and another one's the BYD Han, a big sedan about the size of a Model S. I wasn't alone in this case. I was with the president of a major dealership here in the United States, dealership group here in the United States, and we did the test drives. And he had two questions for the guy. "How much does this vehicle cost?" And our hosts at BYD said, "Well, that one's $65,000 and that one's $72,000. He goes, "Okay." And when our host stepped away, I said, "What do you think?" And he said, "Mike, what do I think? I could sell a shit ton of these right now." I go, "Really?" He said, "I can't get over the fit, the finish, the ride quality. It's very much like the Hyundais, the best of the Hyundais and the Genesis that I'm now getting." And I said, "Yes, but what about the price point?" He said, "Not a problem. This is a really high quality vehicle." So those two recent experiences sort of underline for me the sense that I'm not sure, I don't think people in the West, and especially here in the United States, have any idea about the power and capability of China's auto industry today. Why? Part of it's, I think it's called confirmation bias, because we don't see Chinese cars on American roads, aside from the occasional, Volvo or Polestar. But step outside of the United States, and in hundreds of countries around the world, you're finding record numbers of Chinese cars. In fact, this year, how many of us knew that China became the single largest exporter of cars worldwide, blowing past Japan? Now, to put that into context, just a few years ago, China hardly exported anything. This year, 5 million cars. If an alien came down to Earth and said, "I'm thinking of starting a new car company, John, where should I do my manufacturing?" And I would tell her, "Well, there's only one place to actually do it. If you look, erase all and you're not going to go to Motown, where I'm from, and they just raised wages to, record highs. You're going to go to China. Why? Largest producer of vehicles, largest seller of vehicles, builds more electric vehicles than the rest of the world combined. Batteries, number one and number two in the world. Battery supply chains, critical minerals, low cost, high quality. I mean, it's almost like terrifying just how strong a position China is in today. Okay, so that was part one. Yeah, you got the idea. In fact, my slides, I won't have time to show them, but think of it as sort of like the Godzilla of the auto industry, destroying everything as fast. How did China get here? How am I doing on time? You got a couple minutes left?
Yeah, you got it. And if you want to share a slide or two,
Yeah.
no problem. Let me just grab the clicker here.
Great. So I think many people in this room are familiar with how China got so strong, but just briefly, I remember back in 2009 attending a conference much like this one. The keynote speaker was Minister Wang Gang of MOSTI, and he is a German-trained engineer as well. But his message at that time was, we as leadership in the Chinese government are incredibly frustrated because China is now the largest manufacturer of cars, the largest market for cars, and yet most of the vehicles you see on our roads are not Chinese. This is back in 2009. Our answer is we're going to pivot into a new propulsion system, and that will be EVs. Well, China being China, that didn't just automatically happen. There's a lot of messiness for a few years. And then we fast forward to the thing called Made in China 2025, when Xi Jinping and his lieutenants actually gave a stamp to it and said, we're going to spend tens of billions of dollars to build out electric vehicle charging, electric vehicle production capability, batteries, critical minerals processing. And here we are today. Yeah. So.
No, I think it's so important that you just mentioned Minister Wang Gang, who is really the architect of all of this, German-speaking, former engineer at Audi, put this policy together, and the government policy is just a super huge part of the China story. We do have your slides up, so if you want to, I don't know, do you
maybe
need
just
to advance it, move on, or can Mike advance it with this?
Two, please. Just one more. Yeah. So here's a notion. Next one. So 1 million goes to 5 million in 3 years. Never in the history of the automobile have we seen such extraordinary growth in exports from one country. Next slide. Not just EVs, but ICE and EVs. ICE vehicles going to developing markets where they're more price sensitive. EVs going predominantly to Europe. In fact, this year, China will account for 2 of every 10 new EVs sold in Europe. Lots going to Sweden, to UK, to Spain even. Next slide, please. As I mentioned a moment ago, China builds more EVs than the rest of the world combined, and in second place isn't even close. How many of you have seen or ridden in Chinese cars? Okay, quite a few. So I just thought, next slide or the one after, I believe. Keep going. One more. Yes. So how do I think about Chinese car makers? Way out in front of everyone else is BYD. They account for 40% of total EV production inside China, and they've got the full spectrum of vehicles from your $11,000 Seagull all the way up to, yes, that's not a typo, $149,000 full-size SUV designed to compete with the Range Rover. So BYD is your sort of flagship car company coming out of China. Warren Buffett invested. Then you have a next kind of dimension of Chinese automakers. Next slide, please. This is interesting. Chinese, led by Geely and SAIC, have bought Western brands and done very well with them. So the MG that sells well in the UK, that's Chinese owned. The Volvos, the Polestars, also Chinese owned. And then most recently, the Lotus Electra, also Chinese owned. So when these are on sale in Europe, people are going, oh, MG, I know that. That's a British brand. I'll buy one, not knowing that where they're actually coming from. Then, yes.
Super. Okay. I'm just I'm conscious of that. That was perfect. I think that cues it up well. Now, this transition, obviously, we all know that a battery is a huge component of the cost structure of an electric vehicle. Christina, tell us a little bit about your story. Tell us about the Boston Power story.
So thank you, John. Thanks for having this discussion. So I am not going to use the slides at all. Batteries are very complicated. Started in the 70s, lithium ion dominates the scene and will continue to dominate for a long time. Started in the 70s with the science, first commercialized in 1991 by Sony. The Japanese came in very quickly to get busted by the Koreans on price, only to have themselves be busted by the Chinese on price. China formulated for almost 30 years a 5-year steady policy of an encouraged industry that included the battery industry at its core. There were entrepreneurs all over the world. I am one of many, with 1 foot in Europe and 1 foot in the United States, looking at global markets. There was no chance to grow a company quickly in the US. In fact, I couldn't even do piloting of these crazy big ideas, which was not even auto at the time. My previous company, Boston Power, we started in laptops and portable electronics. HP became our marquee customer. We set up our first factory outside Taipei. I could not for my life get somebody to be scrappy in the US or Europe. Everybody had to get paid up in front. In Asia, I had the chance to say, hey, I've done some turnarounds in the past. I'm a reasonable people leader. I can help you with yield improvements. I can help you with warranty. I can help you think about this. And we helped each other. And I ran the night shift of this crazy idea of having batteries that enabled a laptop to be charged in 30 minutes. Yes, that was a small Boston company that came up with that idea. We were also the first to pioneer your first transatlantic laptop. And with that, we cleaned up, which we got almost no press for, the supply chain to take out chlorofluorohydrides and carbonaceous materials that kill the ozone layer. A little startup like that can change an industry if you have the grounds to grow. I raised a total of $350 million. Half of that came from the Chinese government in forgivable loans. I applied to the US government when we had a big infiltration of big grants during the Obama administration. We lost. And when my competitors in the US got 600 million and I got nothing, you have no choice. So as a scientist, as an entrepreneur, as a business leader, you have to decide who is boss. And in my case, climate change is boss, innovation is boss. And we let the company basically expand in China. And it was quite successful. We built actually the first gigafactory in this industry in the Shanghai corridor with welcomed arms from the administration. So I think how do we get there? It was a consistent message that batteries are critical to electronics, to AI, to transportation, mobility on all levels, from scooters to complex buses, as well as what is the energy and electricity paradigm. The fact that China does not have fossil fuel encourage innovators to think differently. They were quite generous to world innovators in general. In fact, I have 80 or so patents to my name. The previous company, we had 160 patents in a global portfolio. Not once were our IP stolen, not once. So you participate in the ecosystem, you have a pretty good experience. We were feared and loved competitors in that space. And it was a marketplace, actually.
So 2 quick questions, Christina. You mentioned this kind of the role. I mean, this sounds to me like very successful industrial policy on the behalf of the Chinese government at the time.
Yeah.
You mentioned the role of China Inc., if you will, of bringing innovators together. Maybe just say a word about that. And also, you had mentioned just this concept of just the manufacturing prowess, and maybe help us just understand, when we're thinking about a battery, how much of the technology is driven by the chemistry, the design, the product, and how much of the technology is driven by the manufacturability of it?
Awesome. So lots of questions. One question. So I think first going to the latter question, which is simpler. So batteries are half chemistry and half mechanical. When you look at the battery design, manufacturability is ease of manufacturing. So my present company, Cadence Innovation, we're simplifying manufacturing, so it's cheaper. You're simplifying. We know we have 30 years of experience, not all my experience, but colleagues that walked the road before who can teach what the pain points are. So when we are good stewards of the knowledge in the global knowledge base, we can disrupt again. So here comes a new company that comes out with now fire safe, no explosions, simplified, lower cost manufacturing. Using today's standard of automation, I would dare to say, and of course, in an environment of MIT where I belong, and thank you for a wonderful education, an opportunity to say, This could potentially change the paradigm of having batteries made anywhere when it's simple and it's clear, when you know the metrics and you know how to measure them, you have a chance. Back to the innovators and the China Inc. concept. I think China did something extremely smart, and I am currently serving on behalf of the US Department of Energy as chair for the lithium-ion competitiveness for our country and frankly, how the Western world thinks about this. So I think, first of all, we have to be very, very kind of careful. We are number one. We should behave like number one. We have a huge market. We have a huge opportunity. We have not invested in some of the elements of other countries, including China. But this is our country and this is our opportunity to remain as a global leader. What does that mean? You have to be kind and you have to be strong. So for all the things that the US brings, harvest it. And then learn from things that we missed. What did China do so incredibly well? They put the innovators together. We were encouraged to get a chance to practice things, to try things, not in the middle of Main Street. We took an area over here and did a kind of a discussion and ideas around AI and battery technology and small cars, large cars, solar panel lamps. How should this work? In the US, we have today, if we just do US, China, kind of compare, contrast, our VC models and our funding models and our investment thesis are typically, you have 1, 2, 3, maybe, really awesome people, and we put them together in small companies, and we give them a little too little funding, and it's part of the secret sauce of the entrepreneurial spirit. However, we fail to bring in large capital and combine. So when you have Bell Labs, institutions like that, we don't have them anymore, but that is like critical mass, and China did this on purpose. So you gave opportunities. So you had a cool company, you had a cool company, I have a cool, and we have all cool companies. Chinese government would say, hey, you guys, come and play in this area right here together, and you all benefit, and if you win together, you win large contracts together. So we don't have to break our paradigm today, but we should be very conscientious of the fact that disruption happens when you use the strength in the environment. And in our case, it is strong capital systems, strong legal systems, and a culture that welcomes many ways how you can look, how you can say things, and how you project, and then learn from the other systems. I believe the United States we stand together on an unbelievable opportunity. We need to build energy resiliency. We need to build manufacturing resiliency. That is not declaring trade wars. That is not diversifying out of supply chains where we have been for the last 30 years. We are just going to lessen our dependence. The tone of that is so different. I was recently a speaker at the Fortune conference together with Janet Yellen, and she reiterates this at every opening statement. We are not divorcing, we're just lessening our dependence. I think it's critical.
I think that message is very powerful. So, to say we don't want to divorce with China, we want to actually enhance American capacity.
Yeah.
I neglected to mention, by the way, that Christina did her postdoc here
Yes.
at MIT. So we should say welcome back.
Thank you.
Benjamin, I want to turn to you. So tell us a little bit about let's start with the DiDi story. I think that's an interesting story. DiDi is kind of the Uber of China. It's actually quite larger than Uber. Tell us a little bit about that. And Bhuvan, if I could just ask, when you have a moment, please try to pull up the one slide that I had added, okay? Actually, here it is. Okay, I want to actually, just before we go to Benjamin, just have reference to this slide, because this came up in our conversation. This is a slide pulled from the Peterson Institute of International Economics. The slide starts on the left in the year 2010 and ends more or less in the present. What you see in red is the share of the 100 top companies in China that are owned by the private sector effectively. And what you see in the dark blue at the top are the state-owned enterprises. And this is, to me, quite fascinating, because what we see is this relentless trend from 2010 to 2020, where China private companies were growing and booming, and then we see a reversal a dramatic reversal in 2020. Tell us, feed that into the DD story.
Well, DD, I would say, started as one of the many examples of Chinese grassroots entrepreneurship, which was for a very long time, tolerated, encouraged, and also a lot of those entrepreneurs were lucky. China enjoyed generally 40 years of
Christina, could I ask you to pass the mic over? And if you could shut off your other mic.
Thank you.
We just want to make sure we can hear you well, Benjamin. Thank you.
Right. So industrial policy was maybe a small piece of a lot of the success from Chinese-based entrepreneurs, but I would argue more to do with general world peace for many decades. The Western country accepting China and open up their market to China, especially after 2001, when China became a member of the WTO. And I represented investors and in 2012 to invest in Series A round of a DD at a valuation of $10 million US. GSR Ventures, as a Series A lead investor, made more than $1 billion from that deal alone. At that time, I heard around the world in the history of venture capital, there were only 30 cases where one investor made more than $1 billion from one deal. That was just an embodiment of the wealth creation for China tech over the past 15 years. I was lucky to have a front row seat in that scene. And a couple of years later, of course, Grab became another success story coming out of Southeast Asia. The company valuation was already $1 billion at Series B when my team represented GGV Capital to invest in Grab. So, but one story I want to mention is when we invested in DD Series A, at that time, the Chinese regulator were scratching their head what to do with this company. They had no idea whether they qualify for the important commercial ICP license, which is the license required to operate online service in China, because they always gave that kind of a license to companies providing web portal PC-based services. This is one of the first companies where the service is mobile only, and they don't know what to do. And then as a lawyer, we would tell the investor, of course, this is a critical legal risk, but having said that, we do not see the government cracking down on the company, because we're talking about 2012, 2013, the late Chinese Prime Minister Li Keqiang, who just passed away and created a lot of mourning and sentiment in China, in part because people miss the what happened during the first 20, 30 years of opening and reform. And his passing away a week ago was an embodiment of the end of that era, unfortunately. Of course, it's complex. There are many other things to consider. But at that time, we just wouldn't think the government would crack down on that. And there were a lot of backlash from taxi companies, from taxi company owners who oftentimes were oligarchs with ties to Communist Party princeling families. But the company survived and thrived. They went public in the US after they came to the wrong side of the Chinese government. At that time, Li Keqiang, the former prime minister, was already sidelined, and Chairman Xi took over everything, including all the policy making of economics. And then the rest is history. DD got investigated by the Chinese government. It was ordered by Beijing to delist from the US market. And it was fined 2022 last year of 8 billion RMB for alleged breach of data policies and national security risks. And even the founders were personally fined each 1 million RMB. So that concludes the cycle of what I call the Gilded Age of China tech.
And so why is China sort of cracking down on some of its most innovative companies?
Well, I wish I'm a fly on the wall of Zhongnanhai, the headquarters of the Communist Party in Beijing. But people like me have always been scratching our head. But personally, if we look at a lot of things through the lens of preparing for potential war or some other form of confrontation with the US, then a lot of things start to make sense. You need a one belt, one road policy to secure resources and markets. You need to, if you are preparing for war, you need to have more control of people, of information, of all the domestic systems. And data is has been considered very important by Xi Jinping personally. If you just look at his public speeches, not what he tells the foreigners. He would give a talk at the British Parliament talking about how the Chinese rule of law resonates with the British legal system. But what he talks to the party officials about the importance of preparing for a struggle, the importance of taking control of online life, cyber life. And company like DiDi is one of the examples, which is, where we are.
Benjamin, when we chatted the other day, you mentioned that several Chinese companies are almost disguising themselves to not appear Chinese. Now, so we are here at Liberty Mutual headquarters in Boston, Massachusetts at 30 St. James Avenue. At 31 St. James Avenue, across the street, is a company called Temu.
Okay.
So tell us maybe a little bit about what's Temu?
Temu is one of the subsidiaries of Pinduoduo, right? A Chinese e-commerce company, and they are very much a competitor with another company from China called Shein. Shein is huge in low-cost, e-commerce fashion, but they also disguise themselves as a non-Chinese company, if I remember correctly, as a Singapore company. So I guess the point is not just foreign investors or foreign companies losing confidence or being nervous about the China market. It's Chinese entrepreneurs themselves, being concerned, and that's another completion of a cycle. Michael mentioned about BYD, and Christina was talking about batteries. That really reminds me, 20-something years ago, I partially funded my law school education in California, working on a case where BYD was sued in California for patent infringement by Sanyo Denki, along with Panasonic and Sony. Sanyo at that time held most of these Japanese companies held most of the core lithium-ion battery patents in the US. And sure enough, BYD signed up big customers, Motorola and Nokia, and they were going to get sued in the US. For 2 years, I was working part-time on that case and had many contacts with those grassroots entrepreneurs, including the founder of BYD. Wang Chuanfu famously at that time said, there are only two kinds of people not getting rich in China. You're either extremely stupid or you have the mentality of a state-owned company. That was the optimism in China from around 20 years ago.
Yeah.
And the rest is history. They were just a small lithium-ion battery, mobile handheld battery company with a couple of $100 million of annual revenue.
Well, speaking of getting rich, the founder of the parent company, PDD Holdings, I just looked this up last night, Colin Huang, he's now, according to the Huron China Rich List, the third richest person in China with a personal net wealth of $37 billion. And in fact, the market cap of PDD, the parent of this little company across the street from us, that maybe many people in this room haven't even heard of, is currently listed on the NASDAQ at $135 billion. So really, I mean, lots of, fascinating stories here. Now, let's look forward a little bit. And of course, we've got 3 minutes to look forward. Tell us a little bit, maybe Mike, first to you, your reflections on what we just talked about and where it's going.
In so many ways, we seem to be at a historical pivot point. If I may just look at the auto industry for the last 30 years, the whole theme was global automakers descending on the very promising, profitable, and fast-growing China market. That's over. No one's making money in the China market, and the global automakers are losing share and money. On the other hand, for the first time, Chinese automakers are sitting on massive capacity at home in a weak market.
Excess capacity.
Massive excess capacity. Put a number to it, 40 million cars a year, roughly half of the total demand globally sits in China. They now use about 30 million of that. So they have 10 million extra. Guess what they're doing with their factories? They're saying, get new markets globally. And so all of a sudden it gets very interesting because from the perspective of Europe and the United States, we have the markets. That's gold to these Chinese manufacturers. That's our leverage. So we have to make big calls on how do we let them in. Right now, there's a 27.5% import duty on Chinese cars coming to the United States. Do we let them in as manufacturers? Do we let them partner? Big questions. But the roles have reversed. We used to go to China to access their markets. Now the Chinese manufacturers need Europe and the United States like never before.
Yep.
Let's see how that plays out.
Christina?
Yes. So good. So I think this comes back to we stand on the shoulders of previous generations all the time. The United States has a choice. To me, it is go forward and don't be so vulnerable. Play into the kindness, the collaboration, and the opportunity for leadership. We can basically bring more harmony into this, what we actually created, which was a very unharmonious exploitation on some level, but at least financial benefit to the United States in China. That's going to bite back. And on our side, we would like the resiliency. So opportunity for China, scale. Bring in this opportunity, help with the climate change, help with decarbonization. United States, deploy the innovators. Stand with the policy that is longer term. You have an IRA bill right now, 10 years, historic moment. You bring a willpower in the politics in general, both sides of the aisle, to bring manufacturing jobs in, to value national resources and national innovators. As a tech entrepreneur, there might be a home for a company here or in Europe or in India. It is not a foregone conclusion. You have to go to China.
You mentioned
change.
immigration in our chat. We should be perhaps thinking about reforming immigration policy to welcome in these incredibly innovative individuals.
Yeah, and we have a history. Like we have done this before. Bell Labs, I mentioned before, is a great success story. Innovators from all over the world. Frankly, MIT is one of these success stories. You walk that long corridor and you meet the world every day. I love it. That is amazing. We live in peace. We come up with ideas. We don't care so much if we have broken accents or funny looks. We live for the ideal. We are mission-oriented problem solvers. That's the core of the winning characteristic, I believe, for the future. We cannot get into protect the borders, crush everybody. That's a stupid mindset. Let's go for opportunities, leadership, kindness, generosity. These are core values that we understand and that we now must deploy.
Excellent. Over to you, Benjamin. Very well spoken.
I absolutely agree. Well, the past several decades, China had a 1,000 talent program to attract, top talents from research, engineering, technology talents from around the world, especially from the US, and especially those of ethnic Chinese background. This country should turn the table. There's a lot of, at least for the time being, pessimism in the economy about China. The entrepreneurs and investors in China are just depressed, completely depressed. And if their money, people, and technology want to go somewhere else, it's potentially America's or other Western allies' gain, but they need to want it. Just like the past 20 years of China development was largely a story of porting US, especially Silicon Valley, money, talent, technology to China. And if Chinese car or battery companies have better stuff, just do what China did to absorb all this Western money and technology, of course, with national security in mind, but let them in.
Mike, Christina, Benjamin, thank you so much for joining us at the Vision Day